So let's continue on, and now we're going to talk about the design and establishment of secure communication channels. We're going to look at voice, multimedia collaboration, some remote access, the data communications themselves, and then wrap it up with some virtualization and some virtualized networking. So the first one let's talk about is voice. We've put voice everywhere nowadays. We've talked about VoIP a couple times, that voice over IP, but we need to backtrack just a little bit to get a little history for us because you may see something like this on an upcoming exam. The first thing I want to talk about is the PSTN, the Public Switched Telephone Network. And this has been around for many, many years, and those of you that are my age or a little bit older, you know what I'm talking about. Probably a little bit after my age, you may not have any idea what a public switch telephone network is because of cell phones and VoIP that became so popular, a decade ago. You may not have these older circuit switch networks for analog voice communication. The children nowadays, they don't have any idea what it's like to go get a phone and plug it into the wall and have your own colored phone. Or I remember it was such a big deal having your own phone in your room, right? Well, that was the public switched telephone network. Now, we had these in our offices. We had these in our organizations, in our companies as well. We needed people to be able to call us, right? Ask for services, ask our hours, where we're located, and things like that. So this was huge. And this telephone network is actually what we used to use to get our data. The old dial-up modems that we used to have where we had to dial out to an internet service provider. So they would get us, those telecommunication companies would get us on the internet back then, right? Be it slow, it was still a way to access the internet, because we didn't have the broadband availability that we do nowadays. So having these, telephone networks inside of our buildings created some vulnerabilities, right? It's just the way that it is. We used modems to get online, like I said. We've used modems to connect to networking devices for remote communications. We use them for remote management as well. So I've worked on routers where they're not in the same building where I am. They're not even maybe in the same city. They may be in some remote location. Well, if you can't get internet connectivity to it, the interfaces on it aren't working, something is wrong, you can dial in to a remote router using this public switch telephone network. So you could actually call into the router, because it had a modem there, and you could access the router through a command line, which was outstanding. Being able to remote into the office, call in to your old NT server, get remote access from your home, right? That was awesome. But all of these things presented vulnerabilities for organizations, mainly something like war dialing and phone hacking, or phreaking is what they used to call it back in the day, was these networks were susceptible to that. So the war dialing, when it came to our organizations, was people would just get numbers, banks and banks and banks of numbers, kind of like a telephone book. And they would have computer programs that would just go through and dial a number, all right? It's not like they would sit there and, dial the numbers manually and try to figure out and hear what was picking up or wasn't picking up, but they would have programs that would automatically dial out. And if they didn't answer after 4 or 5 rings, it would hang up and try the next number. And then it would hang up and try the next number. And what they were looking for were modems, right? These modems to these remote systems, like our servers inside our organization, or these remote routers or switches that we could have remotely managed. It's looking for these network devices to do malicious activity or maybe hack your server. Try to get some credentials, try to get some of that good information. And then phone hacking, they would do things like try to get like free long distance. right? Because being analog voice, everything worked off tones. And those tones, they could, figure out what tones, what frequency range they were on, and replay that. And the phone equipment, the telecommunications equipment, wouldn't know any different, right? It would hear the tone. Okay, that's the tone I'm waiting for. That's the frequency I'm waiting for. So it would allow, say, free long distance calls. So that was, a phone hacking technique, and you can search on those. They're not as relevant today because we don't use the analog communications like we do, like we did. I say back in the day, I'm that old, but back in the day, I'm talking 20, 30, 40 years ago, this was very popular. Then we have the POTS, the plain old telephone system. Now, these are the telephones that I was talking about that connected to the PSTN. The PSTN, that telephone network, it is circuit switch network, like I said, but it's ran by the telecommunications company. It's not ran by individuals. It's not ran by an organization necessarily, but large telecommunications companies that we're familiar with today. Now, when it got to the end, though, then it turned into the plain old telephone system. That's our part, right? That's the phone that we have hanging on the wall with the 40-foot cord, or the ones that sat on our desk, right? You pick them up, you hear the dial tone, and you press it out, and you hear the beep, 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 beep. The different tones, right? Those are all analog systems, but the plain old telephone is the analog systems that we have running into our homes, or we used to have running into our homes. I'm not saying they're not still out there. They're still available. It's just been many, many years before I've actually seen one of these POTS phones in an actual business or a home. Nowadays, it's usually digital phones, and everybody always has a mobile device, right? A cell phone in their hand somehow. And I used to work with people that would carry 2 or 3, personal ones, work ones, and things like that. So again, the plain old telephone system, that's the part that's on the end, on our end, if you will, of the PSTN. And then they had PBX, right? They started rolling out what's known as a PBX for these large companies, these large organizations. Not necessarily in your home, but what we could use in our company. And that's a private branch exchange, a PBX. And what it does is it has an internal switch inside of your company, inside of your organization, and it routes the calls. And we've heard about this for years. You just may not have realized that that's what it's called, a PBX. You'd be like, well, what is your phone number for your company? So you would give them the number, and then what do we always say at the end? Your extension number, right? You always say, well, my extension is 1234. So you may have 2 or 3 public numbers coming in to the building because that's what everybody advertises. So you call that number and it hits the PBX. So it's going to route that number according to the extension. So the PBX gets that information and it says, okay, where would you like to go? And it listens for the extension and says, oh, that's 1234. That is this way, and it will route that traffic to your desktop phone. So now you pick it up and you have an outside line talking to a customer or whomever it is that you're talking to. So that's how those PBXs work. We're not going to get way down in the weeds when it comes to voice communications, but I want you to be familiar with that, and you need to be familiar with that. Now, the one thing, again, about PBXs is they can be susceptible to war dialing as well, because we can just, again, start dialing phone numbers, right? Just banks and banks of phone numbers. And if it picks up, it may route us through, because we can just put extensions in there too. It may route us through to a server again. It may route us to one of those network devices. It may go ahead and pick up. It may be a modem to the PBX itself, right? It has inherent vulnerabilities as well. So we may be able to attack the PBX directly as well. Now, what about multimedia collaboration? We use multimedia all the time. It's been around for many, many, many years as well. First one let's talk about is peer-to-peer applications, P2P. Now, when you think about that, you may think about, the bad stuff. And there are bad things out there, and when I say bad, I mean illegal. You could have gotten malicious software and things like that as well, but you back in the day we heard things like LimeWire and Kazaa and what was that first one that came? Napster, right? All those peer-to-peer applications, those sharing applications. Nowadays, torrents like BitTorrent, uTorrent, and all those torrent things, they're pretty popular nowadays too. I don't want to say they're just bad though, because, and I think I mentioned this in Domain 1, you can have legit uses for peer-to-peer applications, but they have a negative connotation to them because they are probably, I guess I can say this, mainly used for illegal purposes or malicious purposes. People, you hear all the time about downloading the latest movie or the latest music album or song or an application for that matter. They don't want to pay $1,000 for that high-end application, so they'll get on some of these peer-to-peer sharing applications and see who has a copy of it that's willing to share. Not the best idea, I'm going to say. But like I said, they do have legit applications as well. Like, I think I mentioned the Linux distributions, right? I know I probably go grab one at least once a week from somewhere because they've updated it, or I need to play with it, or I need to learn about it some more. But when you go download these Linux distributions, they will sometimes allow you to do a direct download, which may not be the best because it may be 3 gigs, 4 gigs that you're downloading, a couple gigs. Well, that's a lot of data just to constantly stream. But if you get the torrent, right, and it's a legit torrent because it's a free open source program, right, you can pull pieces from everybody, right, and it's supposed to be faster that way because everybody's sharing. So instead of just pulling it from one location like a direct download, you're getting little piece, little piece, little piece, little piece, and you're sticking it all together on your end. Your application's taking care of that. So it's supposed to be a faster download, a little bit more efficient. And that's totally legit, and that's totally legal. But like I said, these peer-to-peer applications, they do get some negative publicity, which is totally warranted because I've known people, I've worked with people that do it. They download the music, the movies, they're not supposed to. And you can even say, hey, you're not really supposed to do that. But everybody has their own ethics and morals when it comes to that stuff. Now, when it comes to security, a couple things may happen with these peer-to-peer applications. And you can do this in your organization as well. But a lot of the times, you'll see this done on the back end with an ISP, your internet service provider. They may totally block or monitor those ports. They may see, well, I know this torrent application you're using uses, ports 35,000 through 35,009. So we're going to monitor and look at your traffic. They're going to let you know. Or they may just totally block it and say, we think you're doing illegal activities, unethical activities. We're going to block those ports. They may apply throttling. If they don't totally block your access, they may say, well, if you use these ports, you only get 30% of your bandwidth that you pay for. That's not legit traffic. We're not going to shut it all the way off, but we're going to throttle you way back. And that may deter people from downloading large programs. And these large, these movie files can be 1 to 2 gigs large, 800 megabytes. That takes a little bit, especially if you're only downloading at 1 or 2 megabits, right? It may take them a few hours, and it may deter them from actually doing the illegal activity. So you may see a couple things going on there when it comes to those peer-to-peer applications. Now we also have remote meeting technology. And we've been using this for a long time too. I still use this. I use this for consultations all the time. But it's where it kind of helps with telecommuting, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But I could be sitting, say, in the comfort of my home office, and I could be consulting with a half a dozen people, and some of them could be on the West Coast, some of them could be on the East Coast, some of them can be in different countries for that matter. and they can see me, they can hear me. I might be able to share applications. I might be able to share my desktop. I might have like a PowerPoint presentation that they can see and they hear me going through it, right? So that's all remote meeting technologies. There are some security issues in there. For one, you have to be careful what you display on your screen, what applications you're sharing. You wouldn't want to have your calendar on your screen, and then all of a sudden you're sharing your calendar with all these individuals that probably don't need to see it, or they may be seeing sensitive or private emails. If you have your email pulled up and you mess up on the application and you start sharing your email, things like that, you have to be mindful about what you have going on for your remote meeting technologies or what you're using it for. That's why I have a dedicated machine just for that has, applications that I use for the meeting, but I try not to put any sensitive or proprietary information on there because, you start clicking and going and you're multitasking and you're listening and answering questions, you may not pay attention to what exactly you're doing, right? And I'm sure we're all guilty of that, where you forward on an email that you weren't supposed to, or you hit the reply all instead of reply. Kind of the same thing, right? You're going so fast you're not paying attention because it's habit. It's habit for us when it comes to computers. So we got to be careful with our remote meeting technology as well. Instant messaging, been around for years. I remember when I got I think it was my first one. Sure, it was my first instant messenger back when AOL, America Online, came out. What was that, 90-something, early 90s maybe. We got it in our house. I thought it was the greatest thing ever. I didn't have to call somebody now. I could go in these chat rooms. I could go in these instant message rooms, and you could just talk with people, right? They allowed so many people in the room, and everybody can communicate and just had a good time. And it's evolved from so much more than where we came from way back then. I mean, they got the ball rolling. But we have things like web-based instant messaging now. You don't even have to have an application, a dedicated application. You don't have to download something if you don't want to. You can go on these websites, and they may have like a Java applet on there, and you can have instant messaging. I've seen them where people can make it with a JavaScript even. But it relies on a bunch of page refreshes, so it's not the prettiest, but it gets the job done. You're still passing messages. But we see instant messaging on web-based as well. We have enterprise-level instant messaging. Popular one that I just know of top of my head is Microsoft's Lync. Right? It used to be Office Communicator, but now it's called Lync, and it is instant messaging at the enterprise level, and it integrates with so many things like your email and your document storage, and it will tell you if you're in the office, and it will integrate with your calendar and tell people if you're busy or if you're in a meeting or if you're at lunch, and people use it all the time. I see clients all the time. I was getting on an airplane the other day. A young lady sat down beside me, tethered her phone real quick, and she jumped on a meeting, right? One of these meetings, and started using Instant Messenger. And she started chatting and says, hey, I'm landing on a plane or whatever. She started typing, I don't know. But I knew she was using Lync, right? I could see it. I mean, she was real close. I wasn't trying to, shoulder surf, but, plane seats are only so far away. So she was using enterprise level communications. And they're great. Some of those enterprise level communications will take it even a step further beyond instant messaging. Right now you could share your webcam, right? So not only can they see you typing, now they see your face. You could start a call, an online call. What else can you do? You can share files through instant messaging, which that's kind of the bad thing, right? Somebody could send you an instant message with a link and hey, check out this latest video clip. Or check out this latest program I just made, man. And you click on it, and now what happens? Right, you may be infecting yourself with malicious code or some malware, and now you're in trouble. Maybe they put a back door on you, or maybe it's just a virus, and they're trying to just do something malicious. So you have to be careful with instant messaging when you don't know who's sending it to you. Another popular one is Jabber. All right. Jabber is an instant messaging program out there. You can download that. You can be the server if you wanted to. So you could actually go set up your own instant messaging enterprise if you wanted to using the Jabber technology. So you could set up a server and people can communicate or connect to your server, and then they would be able to communicate, and you're kind of like the middleman. And then we also have Internet Relay Chat, IRC. It's been around forever. If you've been in IT, you know about IRC channels or IRC communications because you can go on there and get help, right? We have lots of IT buddies out there on the IRC channels that can help. There's a lot of people out there that don't help so much either, though, right? They can do some malicious things. They can do bad things. They can try to steer you in the wrong direction, give you the wrong advice. Maybe cyberbullying on all these instant messaging, right? You could be susceptible to that. Other instant messengers, like in your game consoles that you may not think about. I know that's not really in an enterprise type setting or maybe even in a business type setting, but in a personal setting, right? You have instant messengers on some of these gaming consoles where you could be playing a game and people start chatting, instant messaging on the screen. I know they have the voice communication as well, but if they don't, some people don't have headsets, right? I don't allow them in my home, right? Because I can't monitor that as well as I can instant messaging. So the instant messaging I can see on the screen if I happen to walk by when somebody's playing or something like that. But if they have a headset on, I can't quite hear that. So it doesn't make me feel as comfortable as a parent. But anyway, you can have instant messaging on your gaming system. And you have to be careful with that as well. So all kind of multimedia collaboration that we have available to us, but they all have some of those inherent risks that we talked about in Domain 1 with our risk analysis. So we have to be careful and be diligent when we're using these technologies. Now, what about remote access? I've talked about telecommuting just a minute ago. They may have to have remote access. If you're working at home, right, if you have a policy, a company policy, I'm not saying you're playing hooky or you're just called in sick and whatever, but you're legitimately working from home, you may need remote access into the headquarters or the main office to get files, to tie in with the network. Right, so you could get on those enterprise systems that we talked about, like the instant messenger or the file shares, or data repositories, or email systems, and all those collaboration systems that we can have. So you can remote into the headquarters. I can remote into my home office. I think I mentioned whenever I'm at like an airport or something like that, and I need to get online and do something that I don't feel I want to do in the open public Wi-Fi, I'll set up remote access back to my home network. I can use things like a VPN, a virtual private network, which builds that tunnel, right? It builds a secure tunnel between me and the distant end. So the traffic that I'm sending is supposed to be secure, right? I'm sticking it through the tunnel, kind of like a water through a straw. You can't really see the water. I see the straw, that's fine, but I can't see the water inside there. I know there's something in there, but I can't get to it. And that's what those tunnels do for us when it comes to remote access. And so you could set up VPN tunnels back into HQ, and that way you can access those enterprise level systems. Now I know we may have some that are web-based, and you have web applications and web services, and that's all great. But if you need to be, right, and I say be, you need to be at work, but it's not possible, or it's not your day to be in the office, you can remote access in. Your computer, your systems are going to think that you are at the office. Because when you remote in, you VPN like through this tunnel, the computer sees that network now. So it's going to get an IP from them as well. So it looks like, or it acts like it's there at your desk. Now some other remote access protocols we could use is PPTP. That's point-to-point tunneling protocol. Now, this is a VPN protocol as well that runs over other types of protocols. So this actually relies on the GRE, the generic routing encapsulation, to build a tunnel between our two endpoints. And it works pretty well. It's been around for quite a while as well. Then we got now something called the Layer 2 tunneling protocol. This is actually a collaboration between Cisco and Microsoft. They kind of came together for this one because PPTP is a Microsoft thing. Layer 2 forwarding is a Cisco thing, and they came together and they came up with L2TP. And this allows callers over a serial line to use PPP to connect to over the internet to those remote networks. So it's another tunneling protocol that we can use, and it's L2TP, Layer 2 tunneling protocol. Now, some more on remote access, because once we get in, or VPN, get that remote access set up, we may have to authenticate ourselves. So we get that communication established back to the HQ, but now we may have something like a Radius server sitting there waiting for us. And that stands for Remote Authentication Dial-In User Service. And don't get hung up on the dial-in part. That's what it was developed for. Remember, we talked about the public switch telephone network. Back then, when we had the analog phones, that's exactly what it was. It was dial-in user service. This is the one we would dial into. They would authenticate us and let us go do what we needed to do. But we don't really use it for dial-in anymore, but the technology is still used. All right, this is an authentication protocol, and we use this in networked environments. We may have mentioned this when we talked about wireless a little bit, right? We talk about wireless, we talked about authenticating on an enterprise level. Remember, we talked about Radius. Same thing for remote connections. We could use that for our VPN connections. So we associate with the HQ, and now we get authenticated by a Radius server. And then once we prove we are who we say we are, remember, we're going to put in our credentials, we're going to identify ourselves, and then we're going to authenticate ourselves, and hopefully we get authorized to get on the network and do our work that we need to do. This remote access Radius server is going to take care of that for us. Now, some other remote access like Telnet. All right, I don't like talking about Telnet as much because, well, it's just unsecure. You really shouldn't use it as far as remote access from, say, your home to the home office or HQ, because that communication is very susceptible to man-in-the-middle attacks, wire sniffing, packet sniffing, because that information is getting sent over in plain text. Anybody can see that data. They can see your username, they can see your password. And if I get that, now what can I do? I can log in as you to the HQ, and nobody's going to be the wiser. So you probably want to use something a little bit more secure, like SSH. Secure Shell would be a better alternative to Telnet. Now, if you're internal, all right, let's say you're internal in your home, or you have a small office and you know everybody in there. Using Telnet internally, probably okay. All right. Now, you still need to be mindful of who's in your organization and who could be possibly on your network. And like I said, if you have a few dozen, you probably know everybody. You recognize their faces. You understand that. But if you're in an office building of thousands, you may not know the people on the second or third floor, and vice versa. So if you use Telnet in that type of scenario, you may have a malicious user roaming the building. Maybe they gained physical access, or maybe you don't have physical controls. Just anybody can walk in the front door, and somebody figured out how to get on the network. So that's where we need to be careful for using Telnet internally. Another thing that kind of fits with remote access is something called a screen scraper. So if you think about, if you've ever gone to the gas station, right, and you go to fill up your car, and while it's filling up, you think, well, the front windshield is pretty dirty. So you go over there and you pull that thing out of with the brush, right? Usually sits in between the pumps, and you start scrubbing off your windshield, right? It's got all kind of water on it and soap, and because you're trying to clean off all the dirt and stuff. You flip it over and it's got that scraper blade, right? A little plastic or rubber blade, and you put it on there and you start pulling it down. You're scraping that information, or in this case, the dirt and the water off of your windshield. Well, think about that when we talk about a screen scraper, because what it will do will go down your screen line by line, pulling that information off. So it can extract data from output, say on a display like a computer monitor, that's being intended for us. Now, you can use this for legit reasons, but whatever we create for good, just keep in mind people can use it for bad, right? Like some of the spyware out there, for example, right? It could be used for bad. It's meant for good. Screen scrapers were meant for good. So we could go through auditing, for example. But as a malicious user, if I could get in and scrape your screen, now what do I have? That's right, I have all the information that you may have been looking at any given time. Could have been secret information, proprietary, confidential, sensitive, right? Your calendar's up there. I scrape your screen. I see your calendar now. I know you're going to be out of the office next week for 4 hours. Things like that. I could use those pieces of information again to formulate an attack. What about virtual applications and virtual desktops? Right? You've heard these have been around for a little while as well. But you can have virtual, we can have virtual everything, and we're going to talk about virtual networks a little bit later, but virtual applications and desktops, what you can do is have, say, a central server in your organization, and you load the desktops on this server, and you load the applications on those desktops. You patch it, you get it all secured, you lock it down, you harden that up, right? We made ourselves small on this central server. But now all of our clients, the 1,000 employees you have, but instead of installing the full applications on all of these devices, you've put them in one location because you've patched it up. You got it configured exactly how it's supposed to be. So instead of you doing it 500 times, 1,000 times, whatever, you do it once. Now what these clients do is they tie into this server and they get a virtual desktop or virtual applications. So everybody sees the same thing. Now let's say you need to update one of those packages. Well, where do you go to update that package? On that one central server, right? Because everybody's looking at that desktop, those virtual applications, so you're only patching it in one place. You're only updating it in one place. You're only taking care of and administrating that information in one place. And those desktops will follow the users wherever they go. So it doesn't matter if they log in at their workstation or if they have to move locations. As soon as they log in, they still have that virtual application, the virtual desktop that they're familiar with. And then all of this kind of ties into telecommuting, because I could use VPN tunnels and telecommuting. I could use remote access, the Radius servers for authentication. I could use virtual applications and virtual desktops because once I VPN in, I'm now part of that network. Once I log in, I can get my virtual desktop in my home now or in my office at a remote location and not at HQ. We could use instant messaging when it comes to telecommuting to keep in constant contact because we're not there directly in the office. You know, you can't get up and walk around to somebody else's cubicle and say, hey, on this report right here, da-da-da-da-da. Or, hey, do you want to go to lunch or whatever? You don't have that luxury. You don't have that collaboration, that personal collaboration when you're telecommuting because you're usually working at home. And somebody else will be working at home. Somebody else will be working at home. And there may be only a core amount of people in the office at any given time. That's a cost savings to companies. Telecommuting, I'm very for. I like telecommuting. But we have to have technologies in place that allow them to do their jobs. And the more technologies that we put in place, us as security professionals, we have to think about the risks involved in that. And we talked about those risks when it came to, instant messaging and sharing of information. So we have to be careful with that. But we know telecommuting, right? We're working from home or outside of the office. And we need these technologies, these remote access technologies like instant messaging, the virtual meetings, very popular when it comes to telecommuting, because if you have a team meeting, let's say, well, you don't want to have everybody drive to the office. So everybody jumps on the virtual meeting and the team lead shares their PowerPoints and their thoughts, and then everybody can pipe in. Because in some of those, by the way, you can even, let's say I was the administrator for that meeting, right? And I say, okay, this is da-da-da-da-da. Does anybody have anything to say? I can open up the floor. They can talk back. I can give their computer screen control, and they could share maybe an idea. But again, we have to be careful with that kind of stuff because you don't want to share the wrong thing with the wrong people.